You had no right to touch my property, Karen. That stone was worth $90,000. The words came out low and tight, a compressed fury that felt foreign in my own mouth. But the sight before me left no room for diplomacy. Where my carefully excavated and stacked pallets of rose-hued quartzite had been sitting just yesterday, there was now nothing but flattened grass and the muddy tracks of a heavy-duty front-loader. 50 tons of my retirement, of my promise to my late wife, scraped off my land and hauled away like trash. Karen, the president of the estates at Eagle Ridge Homeowners Association, stood on the other side of the freshly churned earth, her arms crossed over her ample chest, a vision of suburban sanctimony in a pastel pink tracksuit. Her face, a mask of smug satisfaction, didn't even flicker. "Now, Mark," she began, her voice dripping with the condescending sweetness of a kindergarten teacher addressing a troublesome toddler, "we've been over this. That unsightly pile of rocks was on HOA, common property. It was a safety hazard and an eyesore. I had it removed for the good of the community." She gestured vaguely with a perfectly manicured hand, as if swatting away a fly, or perhaps the concept of property law. The sheer audacity of it was a physical blow. This wasn't HOA common property. This was my land, the 5 acres I'd bought, free and clear, 3 years before this subdivision even broke ground, a fact a simple check of the county plat map would confirm. The stone wasn't a pile of rocks. It was the hand-selected, quarried, and created material for the fireplace and feature walls of the home I was building, a home dedicated to the memory of a woman who loved this land as much as I did. $90,000 wasn't an exaggeration. It was a conservative estimate from the geological appraisal I'd had done before a single shovel broke ground. I took a step forward, my boots sinking into the scarred mud, and held up my phone already recording. "This is my property, Karen. The survey stakes are still visible 100 yards that way. You committed grand larceny." A flicker of something, annoyance, not fear, crossed her face. "Don't be dramatic. I have the HOA charter and the community beautification addendum right here." She patted a thick binder tucked under her arm. "It's all perfectly legal. We have a right to maintain the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood." The gall was breathtaking. She was weaponizing a binder of her own rules to justify felony theft. I saw it then, the glittering obsession in her eyes. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about power. It was about her small kingdom and my refusal to be one of her subjects. The loss of the stone was a gut punch, but the violation, the absolute entitled disregard for my rights, was what ignited a cold, hard resolve deep in my gut. A feeling I hadn't experienced with such intensity since my days in the service. My land, my legacy, had been violated, and the woman responsible was standing there acting like she'd just tidied up a public park. I knew this was just the first move in a war I didn't ask for but was now fully prepared to finish. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're from. And if you've ever had your own HOA nightmare, I want to hear about it. Because what happened next is something you won't believe. This wasn't just about a pile of rocks. It was about a promise. My wife Eleanor and I found this land a decade ago. We were both still active duty, then me with the Army Corps of Engineers. She is a JAG officer. We'd spend our leave periods driving through the hill country, dreaming of the day we could trade our uniforms for work, boots, and build something permanent. This specific 5-acre plot, perched on a ridge overlooking a sleepy valley, was her discovery. It was overgrown, lected, and bordered by a dusty farm road, but she saw through all that. She saw the ancient oaks, the way the light hit the ridge at sunset, and she saw the outcropping of quartzite glittering at the southern edge of the property. "That's the heart of the house, Mark," she'd said, her hand resting on the cool, pinkish stone. "Right there. We'll build our hearth from the land itself." After she was gone, taken by a cancer that was far more aggressive than any enemy I'd ever faced overseas, that promise became my mission. I retired, sold our house near the base, and poured every ounce of my energy and savings into making her vision a reality. For the first 2 years, It was just me and the land. I lived in a small trailer. I parked near the old farm road, and I worked from sunup to sundown. My background wasn't in building houses, but in building infrastructure, dams, bridges, airfields. I understood soil composition, hydrology, and logistics. I approached this project with the same meticulous planning I'd use for a forward operating base. I had the land surveyed not once, but twice. I had soil samples tested. I spent a year just clearing brush and plotting the exact placement of the house to maximize the views and minimize the environmental impact. The quartzite outcropping was the final and most important phase of preparation. It wasn't a simple pile of rocks. I hired a specialty demolition expert, a guy who usually worked on delicate historical sites, to help me use low-impact blasting and precision drilling to extract the stone without shattering it. We spent 4 months quarrying, cutting, and sorting. We separated the large, flat slabs for the hearth and mantel, the medium-sized blocks for the exterior feature walls, and the smaller, more intricate pieces for the garden paths Eleanor had sketched in her notebook. Each piece was cataloged, photographed, and stacked on reinforced pallets, a library of geological history waiting to be assembled into a home. It was back-breaking, painstaking work, and I loved every second of it. It was my therapy. It was my connection to her. Then, civilization encroached. A developer bought the 1,000 acres of farmland in the valley below my ridge, and the estates at Eagle Ridge began to sprout. At first, I paid it little mind. The construction noise was a distant hum, and their access road was on the far side of the development. My property was an island, bordered by the old farm, road, and state land on 2 other sides. I had no access through their subdivision and wanted none. My deed was ironclad, recorded decades before their HOA charter was a gleam in a lawyer's eye. The first sign of trouble was a letter slipped into a plastic bag and zip-tied to my mailbox. It was from the newly formed HOA Architectural Review Committee, informing me that my temporary dwelling, my trailer, and my commercial vehicle, my 20-year-old Ford F-250, were in violation of covenants I had never signed. I threw it away. A week later, a plus-size woman in a golf cart, trailing a plume of dust, came bouncing up the farm road. It was Karen, introducing herself as the HOA president. She had a clipboard and an air of unearned authority. She started in on the trailer, the truck, the unmown state of my pasture, which I was deliberately keeping as a native wildflower meadow. I calmly explained that my property was not part of her association. I even walked her over to the survey marker, a 3-foot iron pin driven into the ground by the county surveyor himself, clearly delineating my property line from the land the developer had bought. She looked at the pin, then back at me, and a strange, stubborn glint appeared in her eyes. "Well," she said, her voice tightening, "this is a high-end community, and your project is affecting our property values. We'll have to see about this." It was a declaration of war I had foolishly underestimated. The letters became more frequent, more demanding. Fines for weeds. Fines for the industrial noise of my generator. Fines for the unsightly storage of my building materials. The very stone she would eventually steal. Each letter was a petty annoyance, a gnat to be swatted away. I sent one single certified letter back to the HOA board, drafted with the help of an old JAG buddy, stating the legal facts of my property's independence and warning them against further harassment. I thought that would be the end of it. I didn't understand the nature of the enemy. I was trained to deal with rational adversaries, to analyze threats based on capabilities and intent. I had no frame of reference for the bottomless well of entitlement and malice that drove a woman like Karen. She wasn't seeking a logical outcome, she was seeking control. And my 5 acres of freedom, my monument to my wife, was a defiant castle just beyond the borders of her tiny beige kingdom. She couldn't stand it. So she escalated, moving from paper threats to a physical invasion. a logistical operation of theft carried out with the smug confidence of a petty tyrant who believes her own rules are the only ones that matter. Standing in the mud, looking at the empty space where my future rested, I finally understood. I wasn't dealing with a bureaucrat, I was dealing with a predator. And my training taught me exactly one way to handle a predator who has invaded your territory. The silence in the local sheriff's substation was thick with the smell of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. Deputy, young man with a soft jaw and eyes that seemed permanently glazed over, stared at my phone, then back at me. I had just shown him the video of my confrontation with Karen, the clear tracks of the machinery and the GPS-tagged photos of the stone pallets as they had sat just the day before. I had my deed, my survey map, and the geological appraisals spread on the counter between us. It was an open and shut case of grand larceny, trespassing, and destruction of property. "So," the deputy said, leaning back in his squeaky chair and steepling his fingers, "she says the rocks were on HOA land, and you say they were on your land." I clenched my jaw. "It's not a matter of what I say, deputy. It's a matter of legal fact. This is a county survey map. This is my deed, recorded in 2011. Her HOA was formed in 2021. The property line is not ambiguous." He sighed, a profound, world-weary sound that was wildly unearned by his 20-something years. "Look, Mr. Davis, what you've got here is a civil dispute, a disagreement over a property line." I tapped the appraisal document. She didn't disagree with $90,000 worth of my property. She hired a contractor with heavy machinery, drove onto my land, and stole it. That's a crime. And she'll say she was acting in good faith based on her understanding of the HOA boundaries. He countered, parroting a line he'd clearly used 100 times before. "It's a he said, she said. You'll need to take her to civil court, get a judge to rule on the boundary, and then sue for damages. We can't get involved in this." I felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't justice. This was a procedural off-ramp for an officer who didn't want to do paperwork or tangle with a politically connected HOA in an upscale community. Karen wasn't just a homeowner. She was the head of an organization that represented hundreds of voters and a significant tax base. I was just one man on a hill. I gathered my documents, my hands moving with a slow, deliberate precision that masked the rage boiling inside me. "So to be clear, deputy," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "if I were to go onto what I believe, in good faith, is my property, which happens to be her front lawn, and remove her prize rose bushes, valued at, say, $500, also consider that a civil dispute." His eyes narrowed. "Sir, I wouldn't advise that. That would be vandalism. But this," I said, gesturing to my phone with the evidence of a $90,000 theft, "is a disagreement. I understand perfectly." I walked out of that station and into the blazing afternoon sun. The injustice of it, a physical weight on my shoulders. Karen had not only stolen from me, she had insulated herself with a wall of plausible deniability and bureaucratic inertia. She had counted on this exact reaction. Knew the system was designed to frustrate, to exhaust, to make the cost of fighting greater than the cost of the loss. And as I stood there by my truck, the engine ticking in the heat, I watched a pristine white pickup from K-Scapes Landscaping and Removal drive past, the same company whose tire tracks now scarred my land. The driver, a beefy man with a sunburned neck, caught my eye and smirked before turning into the entrance of Eagle Ridge. Circle of complicity was complete. That evening, I sat at the small table in my trailer, the door open to the sounds of the crickets and the cool night air. The grief I had been channeling into construction, into purpose, came flooding back, now mingled with a potent sense of violation and anger. I looked at the detailed architectural plans pinned to the wall, the elegant sweep of the great room fireplace, the sturdy stone-clad walls, Eleanor's handwriting was in the margins, little notes and sketches she had made. "Make this hearth big enough for all our future grandkids to sit on," one note read. A wave of despair washed over me. How could I build her house without its heart? But then, another feeling took over, a familiar discipline honed over 25 years of service. Despair is a luxury. Anger is a tool, but only if it's cold and controlled. What I was facing was an operational problem. The enemy had made a successful first strike, exploited a weakness in the local system, and established a fortified position. A direct frontal assault had failed. It was time for a new strategy. It's time to stop being the victim and start being the mission commander. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. At the top of the page, I wrote a single heading, Operation Reclaim. I drew a line down the middle. On the left, I wrote Enemy Assets, and on the right, Friendly Assets. Under Enemy Assets, I listed Karen, President, HOA, Ord, likely complicit, intimidated, A. Scapes, landscaping, contractor, potential witness, accomplice, HOA, charter, bylaws, weaponized, and local LE, unwilling to engage. Under friendly assets, the list was short. The truth, my deed, my survey, my opera jowl, my JAG buddy on the phone, and me. It wasn't much against a fortified enemy. But then I added one more item to my list. The most powerful asset in any unconventional conflict, asymmetric warfare. Karen thought she was fighting a battle over property lines and HOA rules. She was wrong. She had started a war against the man who knew how to dismantle systems from the inside out. A man who had just been handed a righteous cause and an enemy who had grossly underestimated him. The plan began to form, not in a blaze of anger, but in the cold, clear logic of a campaign strategy. Phase 1, reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. Phase 2, resource acquisition and alliance building. Phase 3, isolate and neutralize the target. Phase 4, total victory and restoration. I looked at the empty space on the pad under alliances. I was an outsider here, a hermit on a hill. But Karen had an entire neighborhood of subjects. And the one thing I knew about petty tyrants is that they are never satisfied with just one victim. Somewhere in that manicured suburban landscape, there were others. I just had to find them. The first step was to get off my hill and walk among the people. The fight wasn't just for my stone anymore. It was for the principle, and I was going to turn Karen's perfect little kingdom into my battlefield. My first move was to switch from offense to intelligence. Anger gets you nowhere when you're outgunned. Strategy wins wars. The next morning, instead of my usual F-250, took Eleanor's old Subaru, a far less conspicuous vehicle, and drove into the estates at Eagle Ridge. I parked on a public street near the community mailboxes, a central hub I figured would see a lot of traffic. I was dressed not as the gruff hermit on the hill, but as Mark Davis, retired engineer, potential neighbor. Khakis, a polo shirt, and a friendly, slightly lost expression. My mission was simple: observation and listening. For 2 hours, I just sat and watched the life of the subdivision unfold. The morning parade of expensive SUVs, the joggers in their matching gear, the landscaping crews manicuring lawns to within an inch of their lives. It was a world away from my 5 acres of managed wilderness. It was sterile. War. Around 10 a.m., the residents started their pilgrimage to the mailboxes. I got out of the car and pretended to be looking for a specific address, holding a folded piece of paper. The first few people brushed past me, locked in their own worlds. Then I saw her. An elderly woman, moving slowly with a walker, carefully tending to a small patch of flowers around the mailbox kiosk. Her garden was a riot of color: zinnias, marigolds, black-eyed Susans, a stark contrast to the uniform green turf everywhere else. "Excuse me," I said, approaching slowly. "Those are beautiful flowers." She looked up, her eyes wary at first, then softening. Thank you, dear. A little bit of color in a world of beige. We talked for a few minutes about gardening. Her name was Mrs. Gable. She'd lived here for 2 years. Since her husband passed away, her kids bought her the house to be closer to them. Then I casually mentioned I was thinking of buying property nearby and asked what the HOA was like. Her face clouded over instantly. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she glanced around. "It's the president, Karen. She's difficult." She then told me a story that made my blood run cold. Karen had initiated proceedings to fine her $500 and demand the removal of her unapproved plantings around the mailboxes. But that wasn't the worst of it. She had also been fined, repeatedly, for the ceramic gnomes in her private garden bed, visible from the street. She called them tacky lawn ornaments, Mrs. Gable whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "My grandchildren gave those to me. Each one is from a different trip they took. It was the exact pattern of petty tyranny I had suspected." I thanked her for her time and continued my reconnaissance. My next stop was a young family I'd seen playing in their driveway. The father, a man about my age named Tom, was washing his car. His wife, Jenny, was watching their 2 young kids. I used the same approach, asking for directions. We struck up a conversation. When I brought up the HOA, Tom's posture changed. He physically stiffened. He told me they were in a months-long battle with Karen over their son's therapy dog, a gentle golden retriever. The boy had severe anxiety, and the dog was prescribed by his doctor. But the dog was 5 pounds over the HOA's arbitrary weight limit for pets. Karen was demanding they get rid of the dog or face daily fines and a lien on their house. "We've sent her the doctor's letters, the ADA paperwork," Tom said, his voice tight with frustration. "She won't even look at it. She says exception for one is an exception for all, and that the rules are the rules. We're spending thousands on a lawyer we can't afford." Story after story, it was the same. A family who was forced to repaint their entire house because the shade of beige they used was 2 ticks off the approved color palette. A young couple who had a lien put on their home because their trash cans were visible from the street for 3 hours after the morning pickup. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was terrorizing people. She was using the HOA charter as a cudgel, and the residents, locked into their mortgages and afraid of legal battles, were her hostages. My $90,000 stone theft was starting to look less like an isolated attack and more like the boldest move in a long campaign of abuse. Emboldened, I escalated my intelligence gathering. Phase 2 was resource acquisition. I called my JAG buddy, explained the situation with the deputy, and asked for a recommendation. He gave me the name of a lawyer in the city an hour away. "His name is Arthur Kane," my buddy said. "He's not cheap, and he's a miserable old son of a bitch, but he eats HOAs for breakfast. He sees them as a fundamental violation of American property rights. He's your guy." I met with Arthur Kane the next day. He was exactly as advertised, a man in his late 60s with a face like a clenched fist, wearing a rumpled suit that probably cost more than my truck. His office was filled not with law books, but with tomes on history, philosophy, and military strategy. I laid out my documents on his vast mahogany desk, the deed, the surveys, the appraisal, the video, and my notepad with Apparition RE Claim written at the top. He listened to my entire story without saying a word, his eyes boring into me, assessing. He picked up my notepad, read the heading, and for the first time, a flicker of something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "Operation Reclaim," he grunted. "A bit dramatic, but I like the sentiment. Most people come in here crying. You come in with a battle plan." He looked over the documents again. The police were useless, of course. They never want to touch these. They're lazy, and the law is complicated. But you're not complicated, Mr. Davis. You're righteous, and you're going to be rich. He explained the strategy. The civil suit was the obvious, slow path. But the real leverage was in the criminal code and the HOA's own bylaws. "This woman, Karen," he said, tapping her name on my notes. "She's a classic petty dictator, overconfident, drunk on tiny power, and sloppy. People like this always leave a trail, especially with money. The theft of your stone is the public crime. I guarantee you there are private ones too." He told me to hire the best surveyor I could find, a court-certified expert, to resurvey the land and produce a report that would be unimpeachable in court. He also wanted me to hire a professional geologist, not just for the appraisal, but to testify to the unique quality and irreplaceability of the specific quartzite formation on my land. Finally, he gave me my most important assignment. "You've identified other victims," he said, pointing to my notes on Mrs. Gable and Tom's family. "You need to form a resistance. A. Homeowners Committee for Fiscal Responsibility and Transparent Governance, or some other boring-sounding name. You need to find someone on the inside who understands numbers. An accountant, a bookkeeper. Karen used HOA funds to pay that contractor to steal your property. That's not just mismanagement, it's conversion. It's embezzlement. We're not just going to sue her, we're going to bury her." I walked out of that office with a renewed sense of purpose. I had my commander, my legal weapon. Now I had to build my army. The search for my inside man, my numbers guy, led me to a name I'd heard whispered a few times during my reconnaissance. Dave. He was a retired corporate accountant who, according to neighborhood lore, had once tried to run against Karen for the board and had been systematically humiliated and shut down by a blizzard of procedural maneuvers and personal attacks. He was now a recluse, rarely seen, his pristine lawn maintained by a service, his house a silent fortress in the middle of the beige sea. Finding him was easy, getting him to talk was another matter. I knocked on his door one afternoon, and he opened it a crack, his face etched with suspicion. He was a thin, nervous man in his late 60s, with glasses perched on the end of his nose and a permanent air of defeat. I introduced myself and started to explain my situation with the stolen stone. "I don't want any trouble, son," he said, already trying to close the door. "I've had my fill of trouble with that woman." "I'm not here to make trouble, Dave," I said, putting my hand gently on the door. "I'm here to end it. Arthur Kane is my lawyer." Dave's eyes widened slightly at the name. Kane had a reputation. "Kane," he repeated. "You're serious about this, then?" I nodded. "I have reason to believe Karen used HOA funds to pay the contractor who stole my property. Mr. Kane calls that conversion. I call it theft. You, I'm told, would call it by its proper ledger name. I need someone who can read the HOA's financial statements and find the truth." A flicker of the old fire I'd heard about returned to his eyes. The accountant in him, the man who believed in balanced books and fiscal integrity, was intrigued despite himself. He let me in. His house was immaculate, organized, and joyless. We sat in his study, surrounded by perfectly ordered bookshelves. For the next hour, I laid out the entire plan, operation, reclaim. I showed him my evidence, Kane's initial strategy, and my notes on the other victimized homeowners. He listened, occasionally nodding, a calculator seeming to click behind his eyes. "She always stonewalled me when I asked for detailed expense reports," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "The charter says any homeowner can request to inspect the books with reasonable notice. She always used reasonable as a weapon. It's not reasonable to see them this week, Dave. I'm busy. The records are, with our management company, it will take weeks to get them. Always an excuse." "This time, the request won't come from you," I said. "It will come from Arthur Kane's office, a formal, legal demand for inspection. And she'll be legally obligated to comply." Dave looked at me, long, calculating stare. "If I do this, if I find what you think I'll find, it will get ugly. She'll come after me, after you. She'll turn the neighborhood against us." "She already has," I said. "The difference is, this time we'll be armed with facts, and we won't be alone." That was the final piece of the puzzle. I spent the next week quietly meeting with the people I'd identified. Tom and Jenny, the couple with the therapy dog. Mrs. Gable, the gnome-loving gardener. The family who had to repaint their house. At first, they were terrified. The fear Karen had instilled was palpable. But as I shared my story, and the fact that I had retained a notorious lawyer and was prepared to take the fight all the way, their fear began to curdle into something else: hope. We formed a secret committee. We met in my trailer, on the one piece of ground in the whole area that was free from Karen's surveillance. A young paralegal named Sarah, who was part of the repainting family, became our procedural expert, digging into the HOA's own bylaws to find the mechanisms for calling a special meeting and demanding a vote of no confidence. Dave became our forensic accountant in waiting. Tom, a marketing executive by trade, started drafting quiet, persuasive communications. Mrs. Gable surprisingly became our moral compass and our networker, using her garden club and book club to subtly gauge support and spread whispers of dissent. While my new army was assembling, I was executing my own part of the mission. I hired the surveyor. Kane recommended a man named Henderson, who was practically a legend in the state. He arrived with a team and equipment that looked like it belonged to a NASA mission. For 2 days, they worked, using GPS, lasers, and ground-penetrating radar. The result was a thick, bound report, complete with 3-dimensional renderings, historical, deed, chain of custody analysis, and a signed, sealed, and notarized conclusion that my property line was exactly where I said it was, and that the stolen stone had been located a full 57 feet inside my boundary. The cost was $5,000, and it was worth every penny. Next came the geologist, a professor from the state university, analyzed my photos of the stone, samples I had kept, and visited the quarry site. Her report was even more devastating. The quartzite from that specific outcropping had a unique vein of rose and gold coloration found nowhere else in the region. It was, geological terms, a formation of significant aesthetic and market rarity. Her appraisal wasn't just $90,000. Citing its uniqueness and the cost of specialized extraction, she valued the stolen material and the damage to the source quarry at a staggering $125,000. I now had an arsenal of facts, expert testimony, and legal firepower. Arthur Kane bundled it all into a demand letter that was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It was delivered to Karen's front door by a process server. It laid out the facts of the theft, the evidence, the expert valuations, and gave the HOA 14 days to deliver a certified check for the full amount, plus legal fees, or face a lawsuit that would include not just the HOA as an entity, but her and every member of the board, personally, for damages under the theory of gross negligence and willful misconduct. At the same time, Kane's office sent the formal demand to inspect the HOA's financial records, citing the relevant state statutes and the HOA's own bylaws. We had fired our opening salvo. Now, we waited for the enemy's reaction. I expected her to lawyer up, try to negotiate. I still underestimated her arrogance. 2 days later, a new letter appeared on the community bulletin board signed by Karen. It was a triumphant, self-serving screed. It announced that, acting decisively to protect property values, she had removed a hazardous and unsightly debris pile from a common area that a disgruntled individual was now frivolously attempting to claim. She portrayed herself as the hero, the valiant protector of their aesthetic and financial well-being. She was trying to frame the narrative to poison the well before my story could get out. It was a classic propaganda move, and it was a fatal mistake. She had just admitted, writing, to the entire community that she was the one who had ordered the removal of the stone. She had taken personal credit for the crime. I scanned the letter, a cold smile spreading across my face. I took a picture of it with my phone and sent it to Kane with a single message. She took the bait. His reply was instantaneous. "Excellent! The arrogant always hang themselves. Now, let's give her more rope. Has your accountant got the books yet? The war had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. The box of financial records arrived at Dave's house, not with a courier, but dropped on his porch in the middle of the night, bag of garbage. It was a single, battered cardboard box, filled with loose receipts, bank statements, stuffed into envelopes without any order, and printouts from a cheap accounting program. There was no summary, no ledger, no balance sheet. It was a data dump, a deliberate act of obfuscation, designed to be so overwhelming and chaotic that no sane person would ever be able to make sense of it. Karen's message was clear. You want the books? Here are the books. Good luck. She had picked the wrong man to challenge. For Dave, this wasn't an obstacle. It was an insult to his profession. The defeated slump I had first seen in his posture was gone, replaced by the ramrod straightness of a man on a mission. His study became our war room. For the next week, he, Sarah, the paralegal, and I huddled over his dining room table, which was completely covered in paper. Dave was in his element, a forensic artist reconstructing a crime scene from financial dust. He worked with a quiet, intense focus, sorting, cross-referencing, building spreadsheets from scratch. Sarah and I were his support staff, organizing receipts by date, looking up vendor names, and fetching coffee. It's a classic shell game, Dave muttered on the third night, holding up a receipt from a gas station and another from a high-end restaurant. She's using the HOA debit card for personal expenses, then trying to bury them. A tank of gas for her personal car here, a fancy lunch there. It's small-time graft, a few $1,000s a year. Sloppy, but hard-to-prove intent. She'll just claim it was a mistake. We need more than that, I said, the frustration gnawing at me. We need the smoking gun. Patience, Mark, Dave said, not looking up from a thick stack of invoices. The little lies hide the big ones. You just have to follow the pattern. The breakthrough came on day 5. Sarah was researching the business license for K-Scapes, Landscaping and Removal. The company that had stolen my stone. That's odd, she said, tapping her laptop screen. According to the state registry, K-Scapes was founded just 6 months ago. The registered agent and sole officer is a man named Kevin Peterson. Dave looked up from his sedbracha, his eyes suddenly sharp. Peterson, Dacky. What was Karen's maiden name? A quick search of public records gave us the answer. Karen Miller, formerly Karen Peterson. Kevin Peterson was her brother. Oh, you have got to be kidding me, I breathed. It was worse than we thought. She hadn't just hired a contractor. She had hired her own brother, whose company was barely a legal entity. Dave's fingers flew across his keyboard. There it is, he said a moment later, a grim triumph in his voice. He pointed to his screen. It was a bank transfer from the HOA's primary account. A single payment of $15,000 made to K-Scapes, Landscaping and Removal, 2 days after my stone was taken. The memo line read simply, Common Area Beautification. $15,000. I said, the number hitting me like a punch. She stole $125,000 worth of my property and paid her brother $15,000 of the community's money to do it. And, look at this, Dave said, his voice trembling with righteous anger. He pulled up the HOA's annual budget. The line item for landscape maintenance and common area improvement for the entire year was $20,000. She blew 75% of her entire annual landscaping budget in one shot on one unapproved project paid to her brother's company without a board vote. Sarah, the paralegal, was already looking up the HOA bylaws. Article 5, Section 3. All non-budgeted expenditures over $1,000 or any expenditure to a vendor with a familial relationship to a board member require a majority vote of the entire board of directors and must be preceded by 3 competing bids. She's violated her own rules, state nonprofit laws, and likely committed wire fraud. This was it. This was the smoking gun. The theft of my stone was the predicate crime, the act that started it all. But the cover-up, the financial crime she committed against her own constituents, was what would bring her down. It was no longer just my word against hers. It was her against the numbers. And the numbers didn't lie. Our plan shifted into high gear. With the evidence of financial malfeasance, we had the legal grounds to force a special meeting of the homeowners. Sarah drafted the petition, citing the specific bylaws Karen had violated. According to the rules, petitions signed by just 15% of the homeowners was enough to compel the board to hold a meeting within 30 days. Tom, our marketing guy, drafted a careful fact-based letter to accompany the petition. It didn't mention my stone or me. It focused solely on the urgent need for financial transparency. It spoke of a significant unbudgeted expenditure and the importance of protecting our shared community assets. It was calm, reasonable, and deeply alarming. The time for quiet reconnaissance was over. It was time to go public. We divided the neighborhood into sections. In a single evening, our small band of rebels May, Tom, Jenny, Sarah, and a now fiery Mrs. Gable, who was a surprisingly persuasive advocate, went door to door. We didn't argue. We presented the facts. We showed them the petition. Ear was still there. Some doors were closed in our faces. But for every person who was too afraid to sign, there were two who signed with a grim sense of satisfaction. They had all been victims of Karen's petty reign in one way or another. The fine for the wrong color trash can, the nasty letter about a child's basketball hoop, the constant feeling of being watched and judged. Our petition wasn't just a petition. It was an act of collective defiance. By the end of the night, we didn't have 15%. We had signatures from over 40% of the homeowners. The next morning, I personally delivered the signed petition to the HOA's management company with a copy sent via certified mail to Karen's house and another to Arthur Kane. The clock was now ticking. Karen had 30 days to schedule the meeting where she would be forced to publicly account for her actions. We knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. The day after the petition was delivered, the anonymous flyers appeared. They were slipped under doors in the dead of night. They were slick, professionally printed, and vicious. They painted me as a disgruntled, litigious outsider trying to destroy the community for personal gain. They accused me of trying to avoid paying my fair share by not being part of the HOA. They twisted my military service, implying I was an unstable, aggressive presence. The flyer ended with a dark warning: don't let an outsider with a grudge tear our perfect community apart. Stand with President Karen, who works tirelessly to protect your investment. It was a declaration of open war. But Karen made another critical error. In her rage and panic, she had once again put her name to her actions. The bottom of the flyer read, "Paid for by the Committee to Protect Eagle Ridge," a committee that didn't exist. But the return address on the bulk mail permit for the flyers? It was the HOA's own postal box. Dave was ecstatic. She used HOA funds to print and mail attack flyers against a private citizen and her own constituents, he crowed, adding another entry to his ever-growing spreadsheet of illegal expenditures. She's creating evidence against herself faster than we can document it. The flyers backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating people, they enraged them. The attack on my service record in a community with many veterans was a particularly foolish move. The blatant lies and the use of community funds for a personal smear campaign crystallized the opposition. My small band of rebels grew into a small army. People who had been on the fence were now firmly in our camp. The battle lines were drawn. The date was set for the special meeting. It would be held in the community clubhouse in 2 weeks. It was going to be the trial of Karen Miller. And I would be the star witness for the prosecution. Preparation is the key to victory. In the 2 weeks leading up to the special meeting, our war room in Dave's study transformed into a production facility. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. It was going to be a meticulously choreographed presentation of overwhelming evidence. Arthur Kane's advice was ringing in my ears. Don't get emotional. Don't raise your voice. Let the facts do the fighting. Present your case like you're briefing a general, not arguing with a fool. We took his advice to heart. Tom, with his marketing expertise, took the lead on visual aids. This was a battle for the hearts and minds of homeowners who cared about aesthetics and property values. A dry recitation of facts wouldn't be enough. We needed a show. We invested a few $100s in large, professional foam core display boards, the kind used in corporate presentations. Board number 1 was titled, "The Facts of the Land." On it, we mounted a massive color-coded satellite image of the neighborhood. Using Henderson's unimpeachable survey, we overlaid the legal property lines. A thick, bright red line clearly demarcated my 5 acres from the HOA's jurisdiction. We placed a large yellow star on the spot where my stone had been, a spot now proven to be nearly 60 feet inside my property. Next to it, we placed a blown-up photo of Karen's own hand-drawn map that she had initially shown me, a childish crayon-like scrawl that was laughably inaccurate. The visual contrast was devastating. Fact versus fiction. Board number 2 was the value of the crime. It featured glossy high-resolution photos I had taken of the quarried stone on its pallets, the beautiful rose-hued slabs glinting in the sun. Next to them, we put a photo of the muddy, scarred earth left after the theft. Below the photos, in huge, bold numbers, was the valuation from the university geologist, $125,000. We included a short, powerful quote from her report about the stone's unique rarity. Board number 3 was Dave's masterpiece, titled "Follow the Money." It was a simplified flowchart that even a financial novice could understand. It started with a box labeled HOA General Fund. An arrow pointed to a big red box in the middle. UNATAGAGISD, $15,000, PAYMENT. From that box, an arrow pointed to K-Scapes, landscaping owner Kevin Peterson. And from that box, a dotted line connected to a photo of Karen with the label Vinder's sister. It was a simple, brutal, and undeniable depiction of self-dealing and embezzlement. We created handouts for every homeowner who would attend, a one-page summary of our findings with bullet points and references to the specific HOA bylaws that had been violated. Sarah proofread everything for legal accuracy. We rehearsed our presentation. I would go first, laying out the timeline of the theft, speaking calmly and factually. Dave would follow, presenting the financial evidence. Sarah would then explain the legal and procedural remedies available to the homeowners, including the vote of no confidence. Tom would act as the MC, keeping the meeting orderly. Mrs. Gable, our secret weapon, was tasked with greeting people at the door. Her quiet dignity and the story of her persecuted gnomes had made her a beloved figure among the dissenters. Her presence would be a powerful silent testimony to the human cost of Karen's reign. The night before the meeting, the tension was thick. We did a final run-through in my trailer. My hands were steady as I pointed to the mock-up boards, but my insides were churning. So much was riding on this. It wasn't just about my stone anymore. It was about Dave's vindication, Tom's family's peace, Mrs. Gable's gnomes. It was about returning a community to its people. "What if she just shouts us down?" Jenny asked, voicing the fear we all felt. "What if she has a lawyer who ties us up in procedural knots?" "She will try," I said. "That's her playbook. But this time she's not in a one-on-one meeting where she can bully someone. She's in a public forum, in front of the people who pay her salary. We have the facts, we have the visuals, and we have the moral high ground. We just have to hold the line." Later that night, alone in my trailer, I looked at the plans for the house. I traced the outline of the fireplace with my finger, For the first time in months, it didn't feel like a distant, impossible dream. It felt like a future I had to fight for. I thought about Eleanor. She had been the lawyer, the one with the sharp, logical mind who could dismantle an argument with a few precise questions. But I had been the engineer, the planner, the one who understood that the strength of a structure depends on the integrity of its foundation. Karen had built her little kingdom on a foundation of lies, fear, and stolen money. We were about to perform a structural integrity test, and I was certain it was all about to come crashing down. The next evening, the community clubhouse was packed. Word had spread. This wasn't just another boring HOA meeting. This was an event. People were standing along the back walls. There was a buzz in the air, a mixture of anticipation, anger, and nervous energy. I saw homeowners I recognized from my reconnaissance, their faces grim and determined. Our little group of rebels sat in the front row, our presentation boards covered with cloths, waiting. Karen and the 3 other board members, a trio of meek, terrified-looking individuals who always voted with her, sat at a long table at the front of the room facing the crowd. Karen was dressed in a power-red blazer, her face a mask of confident disdain. Next to her sat a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, obviously her lawyer. She was ready for a fight. She scanned the crowd, her eyes lingering on me for a moment with a look of pure venom before she plastered on a bright, welcoming smile and tapped the microphone. "Welcome, everyone," she chirped, her voice echoing slightly in the crowded room. "It's so wonderful to see so much community engagement." The disingenuousness was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The battle was about to begin. The meeting started with Karen's lawyer, Mr. Slicksuit, attempting to seize control. He stood up and announced that due to the sensitive and potentially litigious nature of the topics raised in the petition, the meeting would be a closed-session discussion for the board only, after which they would issue a statement. The crowd groaned, a collective sound of frustration. This was a classic stall tactic designed to shut us down before we even started. But Sarah was ready. She stood up, her voice clear and steady, holding a copy of the HOA bylaws. "Chairman," she said, addressing the nominal but powerless HOA vice president, deliberately bypassing Karen. "According to Article 3, Section 4 of our governing documents, a special meeting called by petition of the members cannot be moved into a closed session without a 2/3 vote of the members present. The purpose of this meeting is to provide transparency to the members, not to hide information from them. I call for a vote on the motion to keep this meeting open." The lawyer looked stunned. Karen shot Sarah a look that could curdle milk. But the trap was sprung. The vice president, a nervous man named Bill, stammered and looked at Karen, who gave a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of her head. But it was too late. The crowd was already shouting, "Vote! Vote! Vote!" Bill, seeing the tide turning, had no choice. "All in favor of keeping the meeting open say, 'Aye,'" he mumbled. A deafening "Aye" roared through the room. "All opposed, silence." Even Karen and her lawyer knew better than to vote against that wave of public opinion. Our first victory, and it shifted the momentum in the room entirely. Tom, as our designated MC, took the podium. "Thank you, everyone. The petitioners have prepared a brief presentation to outline their concerns. We ask that you hold your questions until the end. First, we will hear from Mr. Mark Davis." I walked to the front, my heart pounding, but my face calm. I stood next to our first covered display board. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady. "My name is Mark Davis. Some of you know me as the man building a house on the ridge. Many of you may only know me from a flyer that was recently circulated." A murmur went through the crowd. "I'm here to talk about facts. On the 12th of October, a significant amount of valuable, quarried stone was removed from my property." I pulled the cloth off board number 1. There was a collective gasp from the audience. The giant color-coded map was stark and undeniable. "This is a certified survey map of our neighborhood. The red line is the legal boundary of the estates at Eagle Ridge. The blue line is my property. The yellow star is where my stone was located. As you can see, it was not in a common area. It was 60 feet inside my legally owned land. I then revealed the small, childish map Karen had used. A few people in the crowd laughed. This, I said, pointing to the crayon-like map, is the evidence the HOA president used to justify her actions. The first question we should all be asking is, on what authority did the board act? I unveiled board number 2. This is what was taken. The beautiful photos of the rose-hued stone silenced the room. And this is the appraisal of its value, conducted by a state university geologist. I pointed to the big bold number, $125,000. The gasp this time was even louder. People started talking amongst themselves. This was not debris. It was the heart of a home I am building in memory of my late wife. It was stolen. The question is, who paid for it? On that cue, I stepped back and Dave walked to the front. He was a different man from the nervous recluse I'd met weeks ago. He stood tall, adjusted his glasses, and radiated an aura of pure, unassailable competence. "Good evening," Dave said, his voice resonating with authority. "I'm a retired accountant and a 20-year resident of this community. At the request of numerous homeowners, I conducted a review of the HOA's recent financial activities." He unveiled board number 3. The flowchart was a gut punch. The simplicity of it was brutal. On the 14th of October, our HOA president, Karen Miller, authorized a wire transfer of $15,000 from our reserve fund. She did this unilaterally, without a board vote, in direct violation of Article 5 of our bylaws. He pointed to the boxes. The payment was made to a company, Casescapes, which was founded 6 months ago. The sole owner of that company is her brother. She used your money to pay her brother to, allegedly, steal Mr. Davis's property. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting questions at the board table. Karen was beet red, her face a thunderous mask of rage. Her lawyer was whispering furiously in her ear, likely telling her to say nothing. But Karen was not a woman who could stay silent when her authority was challenged. She grabbed the microphone, pushing her lawyer's hand away. "This is an outrageous pack of lies," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is a coordinated attack by a disgruntled outsider and a few troublemakers. Yes, I had the rocks removed, and I'm proud of it. I did it for you." She gestured wildly at the crowd. "I did it to protect your property values from his junkyard. He was bringing down the whole neighborhood. That $15,000 was the best money this community ever spent. It was an investment in our aesthetic integrity. I was protecting your investment, and I would do it again." It was the moment, the one Kane had predicted. The confession. In her rage, in her desperate attempt to reframe herself as the hero, she had admitted to everything. On the record, in front of 100 witnesses, she admitted to taking the stone. She admitted to the payment. She admitted it was a deliberate act. Sarah, who had her phone on the podium recording an audio memo for taking minutes, gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We had it. The room fell silent, stunned by her outburst. The raw, ugly entitlement was laid bare for everyone to see. She wasn't a protector. She was a bully who had been caught. In that silence, Mrs. Gable, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke up. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension like a knife. "And did my gnomes threaten your property values too, Karen?" she asked, her voice trembling but clear. "Did my grandchildren's little ceramic men require a $15,000 investment to protect us from them?" That was the breaking point. The dam of fear and intimidation broke, and a flood of righteous anger poured forth. The meeting descended into chaos, but it was a focused chaos. It was the sound of a community taking its power back. Karen sat there, her mouth opening and closing, finally speechless as the people she had terrorized for years found their voice. All at once, the aftermath of Karen's public self-immolation was swift and brutal. The motion for a vote of no confidence in her presidency proposed by Sarah from the podium, passed with a near-unanimous roar of approval. The three other board members, seeing their own skins on the line, quickly distanced themselves from her, voting with the crowd and accepting her immediate, tearful, furious resignation. The slick lawyer, realizing his client had just confessed to multiple felonies on a hot mic, packed his briefcase and slipped out a side door before the vote was even officially tallied. Community, energized and united, immediately voted Dave in as the interim president to oversee a full independent audit and to reform the HOA's governance. In Dom, it was a palace coup executed not with weapons but with spreadsheets, survey maps, and the raw power of collective truth. But for me, the fight wasn't over. The community victory was sweet, but the personal injustice remained. The next morning, I was back in Arthur Kane's office. I played him the recording of Karen's confession. He listened intently, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "It's a beautiful thing," he said when it was over. "The poetry of the self-destructing narcissist. They can't help themselves. Their ego demands they confess, as long as they can frame it as a heroic act." He picked up the phone. "Now, we go from civil to criminal." He called the district attorney's office. This time, he didn't get a board deputy. He got the head of the economic crimes unit. With Kane on the line, and with a digital recording of a confession to grand larceny, embezzlement of nonprofit funds, and conspiracy, the authorities could no longer dismiss this as a civil dispute. 2 days later, a very different kind of law enforcement showed up at Eagle Ridge. Not a local deputy in a patrol car, but two serious-looking investigators in dark suits from the DA's office. They didn't go to the clubhouse. They went straight to Karen's house. They were there for over an hour. We learned later that, presented with a recording and the preliminary findings of Dave's audit, they had laid out the charges: felony theft, embezzlement, and wire fraud. If for a choice, face a full-blown prosecution and likely jail time, or cooperate fully, plead guilty to the lesser charges, and pay full restitution. The news of the criminal investigation spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The shame was too much. A week later, a for sale sign appeared on Karen's perfectly manicured lawn. It was the ultimate defeat for a woman obsessed with property values. She was now a distressed seller, fleeing the community she had once ruled with an iron fist. The HOA's insurance company, faced with the undeniable evidence of willful misconduct and a pending criminal conviction, had no choice but to pay up. They tried to haggle, of course, but Kane was relentless. He presented them with Henderson's survey, the geologist's report, and the bill for his own considerable legal fees. In the end, they sent a certified check to his office for the full $125,000 valuation plus another $25,000 to cover my legal and expert witness costs. The check felt heavy in my hand. It was vindication in paper form, but it wasn't the stone. The money could replace the value, but not the specific tangible pieces of my land that I had planned to build into my hearth. The day the check cleared, I called a meeting with the new HOA board, led by President Dave. We met in the clubhouse, the scene of our great victory. I slid the check across the table. "This is the settlement for the stone that was stolen," I said, "but the crime wasn't just against me. It was against all of you. Karen used your money to commit her crime and to cover it up." I then made them a proposal. I told them I was keeping the $125,000, the value of what was mine. But the extra $25,000 for legal fees, I told them I wanted to donate it back to the community, with one condition. Was it to create a community restoration fund, I proposed. Use it to pay the legal fees for Tom and Jenny's family to secure the rights for their son's therapy dog. Use it to reimburse the family who had to repaint their house. Use it to create a proper playground for the kids, something this neighborhood actually needs more than perfectly uniform beige walls. Dave and the new board were stunned, then deeply moved. My gesture of goodwill cemented the alliance between me, the outsider on the hill, and the community in the valley. We were no longer adversaries, but neighbors. A few weeks later, I was back on my property, standing on the spot where the pallets of stone had once been. The grass was starting to grow back over the muddy scars. I had the money, had my victory, but I still didn't have the heart of my house. Then, a truck I didn't recognize came rumbling up the old farm road. The man who got out was burly with a dusty face and calloused hands. He introduced himself as the owner of a large quarry, 2 counties over. "I read about you in the regional paper," he said, spitting tobacco juice. "The story of the HOA president who stole your rocks. Hell of a story." He walked over to the edge of my property, looked at the outcropping where I had extracted the stone. He picked up a small piece I had missed. "This is good stone," he said, rubbing his thumb over the pinkish grain. "Damn shame what happened." He then looked me in the eye. "My granddaddy started our quarry on a handshake with a promise to a neighbor. The idea of someone stealing a man's stone from his own land. It just don't sit right with me. I talked it over with my boys. We've got a vein of rose granite that's not a perfect match, but it's close. Beautiful stuff. We'd be honored to provide you with whatever you need to build your fireplace. No charge. Consider it a professional courtesy, from one rock man to another." I was speechless. This man's generosity, a gift from a complete stranger, moved me in a way the 6-figure check never could. It was a reminder that for every Karen in the world, there are 10 decent people who understand the simple, bedrock values of integrity and respect. The final, symbolic victory came a month later. Cayscapes, Landscaping and Removal went bankrupt. Kevin Peterson, Karen's brother, had been compelled as part of his sister's plea deal to reveal where he had taken the stone. He hadn't sold it. In his laziness, he had simply dumped it as landfill at a construction site on the other side of the county. It was gone forever, buried under a new strip mall. But Dave, in his meticulous audit, discovered one last invoice. Karen had paid her brother the $15,000 from the HOA fund, but she had also promised him a bonus upon completion. He had actually invoiced the HOA for another $5,000, an invoice that was now, of course, never going to be paid. In her final act of self-dealing, she had not only stolen from me and her neighbors, she had also stiffed her own brother. The poetic justice was so perfect, it was almost comical. Stood on my ridge, looking out over the valley. The for sale sign on Karen's lawn was gone, replaced by a moving truck. Down in the neighborhood, I could see a new wooden playground being assembled in the common area. Tom and Jenny's son was playing fetch with his golden retriever on their front lawn, free and clear. Mrs. Gable's garden gnomes had multiplied, a cheerful, defiant army of them now guarding her flower beds. I had my money back. The community had its freedom. And while the original heart of my house was lost, it was going to be replaced by something even better, a foundation built not just on promises, but on the kindness of strangers and the hard-won victory of a community that had found its soul. The war was over. It was time to build.